The Vance family did not live in a home. They occupied a command center. The sprawling minimalist estate in Atherton, California, was less a symbol of domestic bliss and more a monument to the cold, brilliant mind of its creator, Harrison Vance. Harrison was a titan, a first-generation tech legend who had built his multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, Vance Innovations, from a garage startup into a global force in software and artificial intelligence. He was a man who valued two things above all else: loyalty and results. His son, Ardian Vance, had struggled his entire life to deliver on both. Ardian was the CEO of Vance Media, a subsidiary of the larger conglomerate. It was a respectable, profitable division focused on digital content and streaming services. But in the galaxy of Vance Innovations, it was a minor planet orbiting the sun that was Harrison. Ardian hadn't built Vance Media. He had inherited its leadership. He lived in a state of perpetual, simmering resentment, desperate to prove that the Vance name on his office door was more than just a birthright. The bridge between the distant, demanding father and the resentful, insecure son was Clara Vance. Clara was Ardian's wife, a woman of quiet intelligence, grace, and a warmth that seemed entirely out of place in the sterile world of the Vances. A former art curator, she had a genuine, deep, and loving relationship with her father-in-law. Harrison, a man not known for his sentimentality, adored her. He saw in Clara the integrity, loyalty, and strength he found lacking in his own son. She was, in his eyes, more of a Vance than Ardian was. Now, Clara was 7 months pregnant with the first Vance grandchild. To Harrison, this was not just a family milestone. It was a matter of legacy. The future of his empire, the continuation of his life's work, was growing inside the one person in his family he unequivocally trusted. The tension in the house of Vance was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of their opulent lives. Ardian saw his father's affection for Clara as a betrayal, another piece of evidence that he would never measure up. He treated his wife's bond with his father as a threat, a secret alliance against him. "You're always taking his side," he would accuse Clara after a tense Sunday dinner at the estate. "You look at him with this admiration. You never look at me that way." "That's not true, Ardian," Clara would reply gently, trying to soothe his fragile ego. "I admire you, but your father is a legend. Of course, I respect him." "He's a tyrant," Ardian would mutter, staring out at the perfectly manicured gardens. "And he uses you to control me." Clara dismissed his paranoia as stress. The pressure he was under was immense. But lately, his resentment had taken on a sharper, crueler edge. He had become distant, working late, his phone always angled away from her. He was more concerned with the public image of their marriage than the private reality of it. Unbeknownst to Clara and Harrison, Ardian had begun an affair. His mistress was Chloe Sterling, a beautiful, ambitious actress with a minor role on a popular streaming show produced by Vance Media. Chloe was everything Clara was not: fiery, demanding, and deeply impressed by Ardian's power. She flattered his ego, praised his vision, and encouraged his rebellion against his father. She was the spark he thought he needed to finally set his own world on fire, not realizing it would be a funeral pyre for the life he knew. The betrayal, when it came, was not a quiet, private heartbreak. It was a public execution, meticulously planned and brutally executed by Ardian. He chose the annual Vance Innovations Philanthropy Gala as his stage. The event was the pinnacle of the Silicon Valley social calendar, a gathering of the tech world's most powerful figures, all there to pay tribute to the man at the center of their universe, Harrison Vance. Clara, radiant in a deep blue gown that accentuated her pregnant form, felt a sense of unease all evening. Ardian was strangely attentive, almost performatively so. He held her hand tightly, kissed her for the cameras, and never strayed far from her side. She mistook his behavior for a renewed sense of affection, a sign that they were moving past their recent tensions. In reality, he was positioning his victim in the center of the spotlight before pulling the trigger. The moment he chose was during his own speech. As the CEO of Vance Media, he was scheduled to give a short presentation on the Foundation's work in digital literacy. He walked to the podium, looking confident and handsome. He spoke eloquently about the future of media, about their commitment to quality content. And then he went off script. "As we look to the future," he said, his voice taking on a somber tone, "we must also be honest about our pasts and be brave enough to forge new paths, which is why it is with a heavy heart that I must announce that my wife, Clara, and I have made the difficult but mutual decision to separate." A shocked, collective gasp swept through the ballroom. 300 of the most influential people in the world turned to stare at Clara, who was seated at the head table next to a stunned Harrison. Her smile froze on her face, her mind struggling to process his words. Mutual decision? This was the first she was hearing of it. Ardian continued, his voice filled with a practiced, false sincerity. "Clara is a wonderful woman, and she will be an incredible mother. I will always respect her, but our paths have diverged. I wish her nothing but the best." It was a perfectly crafted statement, painting him as a sensitive, modern man making a painful but mature choice. But then, as he was stepping away from the podium, a reporter from a notorious tech gossip site, clearly tipped off, shouted a question. "Ardian, is it true that you're now in a relationship with actress Chloe Sterling?" Ardian paused, a dramatic, calculated hesitation. He turned back to the microphone, a faint, almost sad smile on his face. "Chloe and I have grown very close," he said. "She's a remarkable woman, and I would ask that you all respect our privacy as we begin this new chapter." The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers and the frantic clicking of camera phones. He had not just announced his divorce, he had announced his affair from the stage of his own father's gala. He had taken the most private, painful moment of his wife's life and turned it into a public relations strategy for his new relationship. Clara sat frozen, the blood draining from her face. The air in her lungs felt thick, impossible to breathe. It was a humiliation so profound, so absolute that it felt like a physical blow. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She looked at her father-in-law. Harrison Vance's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He was not looking at Ardian. He was looking at Clara, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. A hand gently touched her arm. It was Harrison's head of security. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice a low, respectful murmur. "Let's go." They rose, and with as much dignity as she could muster, Clara allowed herself to be escorted from the ballroom, a silent, graceful exit from the wreckage of her life. As she walked, she could hear the pop of flashbulbs behind her as Ardian, her husband, posed for the first official photos with his new love, the actress Chloe Sterling, who had just coincidentally arrived at the gala. The ride back to the Atherton estate was a silent, suffocating journey. Clara stared out the window of the Rolls-Royce, the glittering lights of Silicon Valley blurring into meaningless streaks. She felt nothing. The shock had cauterized her emotions, leaving a profound, hollow numbness. Harrison sat beside her, his large frame rigid, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on his knees. He did not speak, but the rage emanating from him was a palpable, physical force in the car. When they arrived at the estate, Harrison led her not to a guest room, but to the master suite wing, to a beautiful private apartment overlooking the gardens that he and his late wife had prepared years ago, hoping it would one day be a nursery for their grandchildren. "This is your home now, Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "For as long as you need it." Clara finally broke. the numbness giving way to a tidal wave of grief. She collapsed into a chair, her body racked with sobs. Harrison stood by helplessly for a moment, a man more comfortable with hostile takeovers than with tears. He then did something he rarely did. He walked over and placed a heavy, comforting hand on her shoulder, a silent promise of unwavering support. An hour later, the sound of a car screeching up the long driveway announced Ardian's arrival. He had clearly been drinking, his face flushed with a mixture of celebratory adrenaline and belligerent defiance. He strode into the grand hall of the main house, expecting to find Clara, ready to deliver a speech he had no doubt rehearsed about his right to be happy. Instead, he found his father waiting for him, standing alone in the center of the vast marble-floored room. "Where is she?" Ardian demanded, foregoing any greeting. "Clara is resting," Harrison said, his voice dangerously calm. "She will not be speaking with you. Not tonight. Not ever again without a lawyer present." "Oh, come on, father," Ardian scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "Don't be so dramatic. It was a clean break. Better to be honest about it than to drag it out for months." Harrison stared at his son, his eyes filled with a look of such profound contempt that Ardian faltered for a moment. "A clean break?" Harrison repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "You took your pregnant wife, the woman carrying your child, my grandchild, and you publicly humiliated her in front of the entire world. You used my foundation, my name, my house, as the stage for the launch of your sordid little affair. You call that a clean break? I call it a declaration of war." Ardian's fear was quickly replaced by his lifelong resentment. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the confrontation he had been craving. "This is my life, father," he shouted, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall. "Mine, not a division of Vance Innovations. You don't control me. You don't get to approve of my choices. I am my own man." "You are a fool," Harrison said, his voice cutting through Ardian's tirade like a shard of ice. "You have never been your own man. You are a man who has lived his entire life on an allowance of my money, my reputation, and my tolerance. You have mistaken my generosity for your own success." He took a step forward, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "You are correct about one thing. I don't control your personal life. You are free to sleep with whomever you wish. You are free to make a fool of yourself in the tabloids. But I do control your company. I do control your inheritance. I do control the name you so carelessly disgrace." He stopped, standing inches from his son. "And you, Ardian," he said, his voice a low, final decree, "have just made a catastrophic, career-ending, life-altering miscalculation." He turned his back on his son, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. "My security will see you out. You are no longer welcome in this house. Your access to the company's accounts and properties has been terminated, effective immediately. You will hear from my lawyers in the morning regarding your position at Vance Media." Ardian stood stunned into silence. The drunken bravado evaporated, replaced by a cold, terrifying understanding of what he had just done. He had not just broken his marriage. He had broken the unwritten covenant with the source of all his power. "You can't do that," Ardian whispered, his voice trembling. Harrison paused at the doorway but did not turn around. "I can," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a billion-dollar empire. "And I will." The morning after the gala, the business world awoke to a new, shocking reality. Harrison Vance, a man known for his strategic patience and emotional restraint, moved with the speed and ferocity of a lightning strike. He did not delegate. He did not deliberate. He acted. At 7 a.m. sharp, he convened an emergency teleconference of the executive board of the parent company, Vance Innovations. The board was comprised of long-serving, fiercely loyal members who owed their careers and their fortunes to Harrison. They were less a board of directors and more a council of war. Harrison's announcement was brief and brutal. Effective immediately, Ardian Vance is suspended from his duties as CEO of the Vance Media subsidiary, pending a leadership review. I am invoking my authority as chairman and majority shareholder to freeze all capital allocations and intercompany resource sharing with Vance Media. They are, for all intents and purposes, quarantined. There were no objections. There was only a stunned silence, followed by quiet affirmations of support. The board knew that Harrison's personal and professional lives were inextricably linked. An attack on his family was an attack on the stability of the entire empire, and he was cauterizing the wound before the infection could spread. Ardian received the news not from his father, but from a coldly worded official email from the board's secretary. He was sitting in the hotel suite he had shared with Chloe Sterling, a half-eaten room service breakfast congealing on the table. He read the email, then read it again, the words blurring in front of his eyes. Suspended. Capital frozen. Leadership review. It was a corporate death sentence. Vance Media, while profitable, was heavily reliant on the parent company's vast resources. It used Vance Innovations' proprietary AI for its content recommendation algorithms, its massive server farms for its streaming services, and its deep pockets for new acquisitions. Without that support, Vance Media was a ship without an engine, dead in the water. Chloe, who had been excitedly reading the glowing press coverage of their debut as a couple, noticed his ashen face. "What is it, honey?" she asked, her voice bright. "My father," Ardian choked out. "He's cutting me off. He's freezing the company." The concern on Chloe's face was instantly replaced by a flicker of something else. A cold, calculating fear. This was not what she had signed up for. She had attached herself to a prince, a powerful heir. She had not signed up for a pariah in the midst of a family war with a king who held all the cards. While Ardian was reeling, Harrison was making his next move. He summoned his personal legal team, a cadre of the most feared corporate lawyers in Silicon Valley. His instructions were simple. "I want you to conduct a full audit of the Vance Family Trust and my personal will," he commanded. "I want to explore every legal avenue to restructure my son's inheritance. Find the character and integrity clause we drafted years ago. I want to know exactly how much latitude it gives me." He then turned to the head of his M&A team. "I also want a full valuation of the Vance Media division. I want to know what its assets are worth, stripped of the Vance Innovations infrastructure. I want to know what it would look like if we broke it up and sold it for parts." The message was clear. He was not just sidelining his son. He was preparing to erase him, both from the family fortune and from the corporate empire he had built. For Clara, these days were a strange, surreal blur. She was ensconced in the quiet luxury of the Seacliff estate, shielded from the storm. Harrison had insisted she see a top obstetrician to ensure the stress hadn't affected the baby. He had provided her with a discreet therapist. He treated her not as a victim to be pitied, but as a valued family member who had been wounded and needed to heal. He visited her every evening in her suite. He didn't speak much of his plans regarding Ardian. He would simply sit with her, ask about the baby, and talk about the future in broad, reassuring strokes. One evening, he found her looking at a proposal she had written months before, a passion project she had presented to Ardian, who had dismissed it as unprofitable. It was a plan to create a foundation within Vance Media dedicated to funding and developing high-quality educational children's programming. "He said it was a distraction from our core business," Clara said, her voice tinged with a lingering sadness. Harrison took the proposal and read it, his expression thoughtful. "He was a fool," he said after a long silence. "This isn't a distraction, it's a legacy." He handed the proposal back to her, a strange, determined glint in his eye. "Don't throw this away, Clara. I think you might have a use for it very soon." Clara was confused by the remark, but in the coming days she would understand. Harrison Vance was not just dismantling his son's world. He was already planning what to build in its place, and he had decided that the architect of the family's future would not be his own son, but the woman his son had so foolishly cast aside. While Ardian was frantically trying to stop the bleeding at Vance Media, his power and influence draining away with each passing hour, Harrison Vance was orchestrating his masterstroke. It was a move of such breathtaking audacity and strategic brilliance that it would be talked about in Silicon Valley for years to come. It was not just an act of punishment against his son, it was a fundamental reordering of his own legacy. He called a second, even more exclusive meeting. This time it was not the full board, but his core inner circle, his chief financial officer, the head of his legal team, and a few trusted, long-serving board members. They met in the main conference room at the Vance Innovations campus, a room known as the Observatory for its panoramic views and the high-stakes decisions made within it. Harrison stood before them, not as an emotional father, but as the visionary chairman who had guided the company for 4 decades. Vance Innovations has always been about the future, he began, his voice calm and authoritative. We have pioneered advancements in artificial intelligence, in software, in enterprise solutions. But the world is changing. The public's trust in technology is eroding. They see us, rightly or wrongly, as amoral behemoths. We need to do more than just innovate. We need to invest in our own humanity. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Therefore, I am announcing a major new strategic initiative. We are forming a new, independent division within the conglomerate. This division will have a dual mandate to act as a venture capital fund for ethical and socially responsible technology, and to oversee all of the Vance family's philanthropic endeavors. It will be the moral and creative compass of our entire organization. He let the announcement sink in. It was a massive, unexpected move. This new division, he continued, will be seeded with an initial endowment of $1 billion from the Vance Family Trust. A quiet gasp went through the room. $1 billion was a staggering sum, even for a company of their size. And, Harrison said, delivering the final, stunning blow, it will be called the Clara Vance Foundation. Its president and chief executive officer will be Clara Vance. The silence in the room was absolute. The implications were seismic. He had not just created a new, powerful division, he had put his daughter-in-law, a woman with no official corporate title, in charge of it. He had taken a significant portion of the family's wealth and future and handed it to her. Clara, Harrison explained, his tone leaving no room for argument, possesses the integrity, the vision, and the character that this initiative requires. Her background in the arts and her passion for education make her uniquely qualified to guide our investments in a more humane direction. She will have the full, unconditional support of this board and this company. It was checkmate. He had effectively elevated Clara to a position of immense power within the Vance empire, making her a senior executive on par with the heads of his most important divisions. She was no longer just the estranged wife of a subsidiary CEO. She was the face of the company's future, the steward of its soul. He had created a new heir. The public announcement was released an hour later. The news spread like wildfire. It was a brilliant PR move, recasting the narrative from a sordid family drama into a story of a visionary company empowering a woman of integrity. The press lauded the move, praising Harrison's bold vision and Clara's quiet strength. When Clara first heard the news from Harrison himself, she was stunned into silence. I don't know what to say, she stammered. I don't have the experience to run something like that. You have the character, Harrison replied simply. That is the only qualification that matters. I will give you the best team in the world to support you. All I need from you is your vision and your integrity. This foundation, Clara, is for you and your child. It is your inheritance. It is the future of this family. I am asking you to lead it. It was an incredible, terrifying opportunity. It was a chance to take the ideas she was passionate about, the ideas Ardian had dismissed, and turn them into a powerful force for good. It was her chance to build her own legacy, a legacy for her child, separate from the wreckage of her marriage. "Yes," she said finally, her voice filled with a new, quiet determination. "Yes, I'll do it." For Ardian, the news was the final, soul-crushing blow. He saw it on a news alert on his phone while sitting in a sterile lawyer's office. He read the headline, "Harrison Vance launches billion-dollar foundation headed by daughter-in-law Clara Vance," and he felt a kind of psychological vertigo. His father had not just disowned him, he had replaced him. He had taken his wife, the woman he had cast aside, and elevated her to a position of power and prestige that he, the son and heir, had never been able to achieve on his own. His rebellion, his desperate attempt to escape his father's shadow, had resulted in the one outcome he had always feared most. He had been rendered utterly, completely irrelevant. The creation of the Clara Vance Foundation was the public-facing, philanthropic masterstroke. But behind the scenes, the siege of Vance Media was a campaign of a different sort, a cold, brutal, and systematic dismantling of a corporate entity, orchestrated by a man who treated business as a bloodless form of warfare. The first blow landed not with a bang, but with a quiet, digital hum. On a Monday morning, the entire technological infrastructure of Vance Media began to seize up. The crisis started in the engineering department. A frantic series of alerts pinged across their screens. Dr. Eris Thorne, the brilliant but perpetually stressed head of engineering, watched in horror as her diagnostic panels lit up with red warnings. The connection to the Vance Innovations mainframe, the supercomputing core that housed the Prometheus AI, had been severed. She burst into Ardian's glass-walled office, her face a mask of controlled panic. "He's done it, Ardian," she said, her voice tight. "He's cut us off. Your father has unplugged us from the mothership." Ardian, who had been trying to project an aura of defiant normalcy, felt a cold spike of fear. "What are you talking about?" "The Prometheus AI!" Eris exclaimed, her voice rising. "Our entire content recommendation engine, our ad-serving platform, our user analytics, it all runs on Prometheus. Without it, our streaming service is just a glorified YouTube channel from 2008. We are flying blind, and the engine has just flamed out." The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. By noon, Vance Media Down was trending on social media. Users were complaining of a clunky, unresponsive interface and bizarrely irrelevant content suggestions. The company's automated ad sales platform, which generated millions in revenue per day, was failing, unable to target users effectively. They were not just losing viewers, they were actively hemorrhaging money with every passing second. Ardian convened an emergency meeting of his executive team. The atmosphere in the boardroom, once a place of arrogant self-congratulation, was now thick with the stench of fear. He tried to rally them, his voice unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "This is a temporary measure," he insisted, pacing in front of the panoramic window. "A negotiating tactic. My father is a bully, and this is how he operates. He's trying to scare us. We need to hold the line, show him we won't be intimidated. We'll build our own AI. We'll find new partners." Elena Hayes, his pragmatic and long-suffering COO, looked at him as if he were a delusional child. "Build our own AI, Ardian?" she asked, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Prometheus is the result of a 20-year, $5 billion investment from Vance Innovations. You expect us to replicate it with what resources?" The capital financing for our entire fall slate was frozen this morning. Our top 3 production partners have already put us on notice for breach of contract. We are in a state of corporate cardiac arrest, and you are talking about training for a marathon. She leaned forward, her gaze unflinching. "This isn't a negotiation. This is a siege. And the enemy isn't at the gates. He's in our own server rooms. and he has just turned off the power. We need a survival strategy, not a suicide mission." His own team was looking at him not as a leader, but as the architect of their ruin. His authority had evaporated. He was a king with no army, no treasury, and no castle. Desperate and enraged, Ardian turned to the only weapon he thought he had left: the law. He retained Sterling Kyle, a notoriously aggressive litigator known for his scorched earth tactics. In Kyle's gleaming Century City office, Ardian vented his fury, outlining a massive, multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against his own father. "We'll depose him," Ardian raged, pacing the plush carpet. "We'll subpoena every document from Vance Innovations for the last decade. We'll expose him for the tyrant he is." Kyle, a man who saw conflict as a business opportunity, eagerly drafted a blistering legal threat. It was a 20-page document filled with accusations of breach of fiduciary duty, tortious interference, and corporate sabotage. It was a declaration of all-out legal war. He had it sent via a stone-faced courier to Harrison's legal department. The response arrived the following afternoon. It was not a legal brief, but a slim, elegant portfolio delivered by a quiet, unassuming legal aide. Inside was a single-page letter, a masterpiece of understated, terrifying force. It stated in cool, formal language that should Ardian proceed with his frivolous and vexatious lawsuit, the discovery process would, of course, be a two-way street. It would compel Vance Innovations to publicly release the full, unredacted findings of its internal leadership review of the Vance Media Division. Attached was a 2-page summary of said review. It was not a collection of vague accusations. It was a forensic accounting of Ardian's professional and personal misconduct, a timeline of his failures. It listed, with dates and amounts, the improper use of corporate accounts for personal travel, apartments, and gifts for Miss Chloe Sterling. It referenced sworn affidavits from female employees detailing a pattern of inappropriate behavior. It included a detailed analysis from the parent company's CFO showing how Ardian's reckless, ego-driven acquisitions had cost the company nearly $100 million in losses. Sterling Kyle read the summary, his face slowly draining of color. The aggressive, confident litigator seemed to shrink in his expensive suit. He looked up at Ardian, his expression a mixture of awe and terror at the machine they were up against. "We have to stand down, Ardian," Kyle said, his voice a whisper. "This isn't a lawsuit they're threatening. This is a character assassination, and they have the receipts. This isn't a threat, it's an execution order. If we file, they won't just win in court. They will release this. They will destroy you in the press so completely that you will never work in this country again. We have been outmaneuvered, outgunned, and utterly checkmated." That night, Ardian returned to the hotel suite, a man hollowed out by defeat. The last of his hope was gone. He was looking for some small measure of comfort, of human connection in the wreckage. He found Chloe on the phone with her agent, her voice bright and bubbly as she discussed a potential audition. When she hung up, the smile vanished from her face, replaced by a look of bored irritation as she saw him. "You look terrible," she said, turning to the mirror to examine her makeup. "I had a bad day," he said, his voice cracking. "Chloe, we need to talk. We need to figure out what we're going to do." "I know what I'm going to do," she said, snapping a tube of lipstick shut. "I'm going to Vancouver next week. There's a new pilot. The part is fantastic." "Vancouver?" he stammered. "But what about us? I blew up my entire life, for you, for us." She finally turned to face him, and her beautiful face was a mask of cold, dismissive pity. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, Ardian, don't be so naive," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You didn't do this for me. You did this for you. This was never about our love story. This was about your pathetic, lifelong psychodrama with your father. You were a little boy throwing a tantrum, trying to prove you could break his favorite toy. I was just the shiny, exciting rock you decided to throw." She walked to the closet and pulled out her already packed suitcases. The problem is you missed. You didn't even scratch his favorite toy. You just managed to set your own treehouse on fire. I attached myself to the heir of an empire, a prince. It turns out you're just a disgraced, unemployed middle manager who is about to be cut off from his trust fund. That is a brand I simply cannot be associated with." She wheeled her suitcases to the door. "Your father, for all his faults, is a man of immense power. He builds things. You," she said, delivering the final, devastating verdict, "just break them, starting with your own life." She opened the door and walked out without a backward glance, leaving him alone in the suffocating silence of the suite, a king in a kingdom of one. His reign officially and irrevocably over. While Ardian's world was being reduced to ashes, Clara's was rising. She had moved into a beautiful, light-filled home on the Seacliff estate, a place of peace and new beginnings. Her days were no longer defined by her husband's moods, but by her own burgeoning purpose. The first official board meeting of the Clara Vance Foundation was a testament to her transformation. She sat at the head of a table filled with some of the sharpest minds her father-in-law employed. Harrison was there, but he sat to the side, a quiet, observant presence, allowing her to command the room. And she did. She presented a comprehensive, 5-year strategic plan, her voice filled with a passion and authority that captivated them all. She spoke of ethical investing, of leveraging their vast resources to create a new paradigm of corporate responsibility. After the meeting, one of the board members, a legendary venture capitalist, approached Harrison. "She's a natural, Harrison," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "She has your strategic mind, but I dare say she has a better heart." Harrison simply nodded, a rare, proud smile touching his lips. Later that evening, Clara walked through the quiet gardens of the estate, the cool evening air a balm on her skin. She felt her daughter kick, a strong, reassuring thump against her ribs. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of peace. The seed she had witnessed was a story of destruction, a cautionary tale of a man who had flown too close to the sun and had been burned to cinders by his own hubris. But her story, and the story of the child she carried, was just beginning. It would not be a story of inherited power, but of purpose discovered. It was the quiet, unshakable ascent of a new and better kind of legacy. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was not a call from his father's assistant or a text from a family member. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope delivered by a stoic legal courier to the hotel suite that had become Ardian's gilded prison. The letter within was cold, formal, and utterly terrifying. It was a legal notice summoning him to a formal meeting at the headquarters of Vance Innovations in 1 week's time. The subject was listed as the restructuring of the Vance Family Trust and the terms of your separation from all Vance-related entities. The list of required attendees included his father, Harrison Vance, Clara Vance, and a team of estate lawyers from the prestigious firm of Albright, Sterling, and Moore. For a week, Ardian oscillated between a state of panicked dread and a flickering, defiant hope. He spent hours pacing the confines of his suite, rehearsing speeches in the mirror. He would be reasonable. He would be remorseful. He would appeal to Clara, to the love they once shared, to the child she was about to bring into the world. He couldn't shake the narcissistic belief that this was all a grand, theatrical gesture on his father's part, a scare tactic designed to bring him to heel. He still believed he could talk his way out of it. He still believed he had a path back. He tried calling Chloe, the actress for whom he had torched his entire world. Her agent answered, informing him with a chilly professionalism that Ms. Sterling was unavailable and wished him all the best in his future endeavors. The finality in the agent's tone was unmistakable. He was utterly, completely alone. The morning of the meeting, he dressed with meticulous care in his finest suit, a final, pathetic attempt to project the power he no longer possessed. He walked into the main conference room at Vance Innovations, a space he had once commanded, and was immediately struck by the cold, deliberate staging of his own execution. His father, Harrison, sat at the head of the impossibly long, polished mahogany table, a silent, unmoving monolith of authority. To his right, in the seat of honor, sat Clara. Now in her final month of pregnancy, she radiated a serene, unshakable strength. She was no longer the heartbroken wife. She was a matriarch in waiting. On the table before her was not a purse, but a leather-bound portfolio. At the far distant end of the table, on the opposite side, a single isolated chair had been set for him. Facing him were a half-dozen of the most formidable corporate lawyers on the West Coast. He took his seat, the silence in the room a heavy, suffocating blanket. The head lawyer, a stern man in his 60s named Mr. Albright, began without preamble. "Ardian," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion, "we are here today to formalize the consequences of your recent actions. As you know, the Vance Family Trust, established by your grandfather, is the legal instrument that governs the family's assets and your position within its corporate structures." He opened a thick binder. Article 7, Section 4 of the Trust, a section I believe you have a copy of, is what is commonly referred to as the Character and Integrity Clause. It grants the acting patriarch broad, discretionary power to amend or revoke a beneficiary's inheritance in the event that said beneficiary engages in conduct that brings public disrepute upon the Vance name or acts in a manner that willfully destabilizes the family's core business interests. Albright looked at Ardian over the top of his reading glasses. "It is your father's legal position that your actions at the philanthropy gala, the public and cruel dissolution of your marriage to a pregnant spouse, and the subsequent instability and reputational damage your behavior has caused, represent a profound and unequivocal violation of this clause." Ardian opened his mouth to protest, but Albright held up a hand. "Let me be clear. What follows is not a negotiation. It is a dissemination of information regarding decisions that have already been made and legally ratified." For the next 20 minutes, Albright methodically dismantled Ardian's life, piece by piece. His employment with Vance Media and all other Vance entities was terminated, effective immediately. All unvested stock options were voided. His corporate credit cards, accounts, and access privileges had already been revoked. Then came the final, devastating blow. "The matter of your inheritance has been restructured," Albright continued, turning a page. "Your primary share of the Vance Family Trust, which would have passed to you upon your father's death, has been legally and irrevocably redirected. A new, independent trust has been formed. The sole beneficiary of this new trust will be your biological child and any future children you may have with Clara Vance." Ardian stared, his mind struggling to keep up. His child. He still had a connection. "This new trust," Albright said, delivering the coup de grace, "will be managed by 2 co-trustees who will have sole discretion over all assets until the beneficiary reaches the age of 30. Those co-trustees will be your father, Harrison Vance, and the child's mother, Clara Vance." The room spun. It was a complete and total erasure. He would be a ghost, a footnote in his own child's immense fortune, a fortune that would be controlled by his ex-wife and the father who despised him. This isn't legal," he stammered, the words catching in his throat. "You can't just take my birthright." He turned his desperate gaze to Clara. "Clara, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Don't let him do this. Think of our child, our family." Clara met his gaze, and for the first time, she spoke. Her voice was not angry, not vengeful, but filled with a steely resolve. "I am thinking of my child, Ardian," she said, In fact, she is the only thing I have thought about for the past month. And I have come to realize that the greatest gift I can ever give her is a life free from your influence, a life where she is not exposed to your cruelty, your instability, and your profound lack of character. This isn't something my father-in-law is doing to you. This is the direct consequence of what you did to us. Ardian, shattered by her words, turned his wild, pleading eyes to his father. "Father, please." Harrison Vance finally spoke, his voice a low, rumbling earthquake of finality. "Your grandfather was a wise man, Ardian. He understood that an empire is not preserved by blood alone, but by character. He built this company from nothing with his bare hands and the force of his will. I have spent my life honoring that legacy, building upon it, and you treated it like a plaything. You used the power and security it gave you not to build, but to indulge your own petty vanities and insecurities." He stood up, the full, intimidating force of his presence filling the room. "You stand here, and you talk of your birthright. You have no birthright. You have squandered it. You have proven you are not a builder. You are a vandal, and I will not stand by and watch a vandal destroy my life's work." He gestured toward Clara. "She has the one thing you never will, Ardian. She has character. She has integrity. She is a builder. The future of this family and this company is safer in her hands than it ever was in yours." Mr. Albright slid one final document across the table. It was a separation agreement, offering a one-time, lump-sum payment of $10 million, a fraction of his lost inheritance. In exchange, he would waive all future claims. It was a choice between walking away with a fortune most people only dream of, or fighting and being left with absolutely nothing. With a hand that shook so violently he could barely hold the pen, Ardian signed his name. He signed away his company, his inheritance, his family, his future. He stood up from his isolated chair, a man utterly hollowed out, and walked from the room without another word. As he passed through the gleaming lobby of the company his grandfather had founded, the employees, his former employees, averted their eyes. He was already a ghost. A month later, Clara gave birth to a beautiful, healthy daughter. She named her Clara, a classic, strong name, a name with no ties to the recent, painful past. In the quiet, sunlit hospital room, Harrison Vance held his granddaughter for the first time, his stern, powerful face transformed by a look of absolute, unconditional love. He looked at Clara, her face filled with the tired, joyful glow of new motherhood. The succession was complete. The future of the House of Vance was secure. 2 years later, the Grand Hall of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art was filled with the bright, optimistic energy of the city's tech and philanthropic communities. It was the inaugural gala for the Clara Vance Foundation. At the podium stood its president, Clara Vance, a woman radiating a confidence and purpose that was entirely her own. "Legacy," she said to the rapt audience, "is often thought of as something we inherit, a name, a fortune. But I believe true legacy is something we build. It is built through our actions, through our integrity, and through our commitment to leaving the world a little better than we found it." She went on to announce the Foundation's first major initiative, a massive funding project for high-quality, accessible educational programming for children, the very project Ardian had dismissed as a waste of time. From a table near the front, Harrison Vance watched his granddaughter, Clara, asleep in her stroller beside him. He saw the strength, the vision, the character in the woman on the stage. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he had made the right choice. He had been forced to amputate a part of his own bloodline to save his empire, a choice that would haunt him in his quietest moments. But as he looked at Clara, and then at the sleeping child who would one day inherit it all, he understood that he had not lost a son. He had gained a daughter, and in doing so had secured a future for the Vance name far greater than Ardian could ever have conceived. The reckoning was over. The rebuilding had begun. Ardian Vance's cruel betrayal, meant to be a declaration of his own freedom, instead triggered his complete and total ruin. He mistakenly believed that his bloodline made him untouchable. But his father, the legendary billionaire Harrison Vance, made a choice dictated not by blood, but by character, choosing his honorable daughter-in-law over his own disgraced son. This is a stunning story of family dynamics, corporate power, and the ultimate triumph of integrity over inheritance. While Ardian was left with nothing, Clara rose from the ashes to become a powerful leader, reshaping the Vance legacy in her own image. He told her she was nothing without his name. He laughed as she left for her little errands, tossing a black Amex on the marble table, telling her not to break a nail. He was Matteo Blackwood, a titan of industry. She was Elara, his quiet, beautiful trophy wife. He was obsessed with being the main sponsor of the city's most exclusive event, the Starlight Gala. But a mystery benefactor outbid him, and tonight, in front of everyone who matters, he's about to see his quiet little wife step into the spotlight and utterly destroy him. The penthouse was silent, but not peaceful. It was the sterile, oppressive silence of a museum, a place where things were looked at, but never touched. From 70 floors above the Upper East Side, the sounds of New York City were a distant, irrelevant hum. Matteo Blackwood stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of Macallan 25 in one hand, his phone pressed so hard to his ear it might have fused with his skull. "What do you mean, outbid?" He snarled, his voice a low vibration that rattled the crystal paperweight on his desk. "This is the Starlight Gala, not a high school bake sale. You find out who it is. I don't care if it's Musk Bezos or the Pope. Everyone has a price. Find theirs, then double it." He listened for a moment, his face tightening. "An anonymous benefactor wishes to remain private. Don't give me that garbage. Find them. I want that sponsorship. Blackwood Capital will be the name on that stage. Handle it." He ended the call without a goodbye, slamming the phone onto its cradle. He turned his Tom Ford suit, uncreased his anger, a perfectly tailored accessory. His eyes fell on his wife, Elara. Elara Blackwood was sitting in the pearl-white armchair by the cold, modern fireplace, tending to a phalaenopsis orchid. She was, as always, beautiful. Her pale blonde hair was pulled back in a simple chignon. She wore cream-colored cashmere trousers and a matching silk blouse. To Matteo, she was the most expensive and least interesting acquisition he had ever made. "Did you hear any of that?" he demanded. Elara looked up, her grey eyes clear and calm. "I heard you shouting Matteo. It's hard to miss. I'm talking about the gala, the Starlight Gala, the single most important philanthropic event of the year, the one I've been structuring a deal around for 6 months, and some nobody waltzes in and snatches the main sponsorship. Perhaps they simply believe in the cause," Elara said, softly, her fingers gently adjusting a stake for the orchid. The cause was funding STEM education for underprivileged girls. Matteo let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor, like metal striking flint. "Believe in the cause, darling, please. This isn't about charity. It's about positioning. It's about having the Mayor Senator Albright and every venture capitalist on the eastern seaboard see the Blackwood name synonymous with a $100 million philanthropic drive. And you," he said, pointing a finger, "you just sit there with your flowers." Elara stood, brushing a speck of potting soil from her trousers. "The flowers need care. They can't care for themselves." Profound.
He loosened his tie, his frustration needing a new target. "While I'm trying to salvage our entire fourth quarter, what's on your grand agenda today?" "A fitting at Bergdorf's, a 2-hour lunch at Le Bernardin. With those other vacuous wives, I have some errands to run," she said simply. "I'll be out for a few hours." "Errands," he scoffed again, the sound truly dismissive this time. He walked to the massive marble island that separated the living area from the kitchen he'd never once used. He pulled his wallet, a sleek black alligator skin piece, and retrieved an Amex Centurion card. The black card. He spun it across the marble counter. It skidded to a stop in front of her. "Go. Buy a new car, a new face, whatever it is you do," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Try not to break a nail. God knows you're useless if you aren't decorative." This was their routine. His stress, his condescension, her quiet acceptance. Elara looked at the black card. She didn't move to take it. "I have my own." "Oh, right. Your little allowance," he said with a smirk. He thought of the generous 5-figure allowance he wired to her account monthly, the one she supposedly used for her clothes and her little charity lunches. He imagined it was all spent before the first of the month. Something like that. She agreed. She walked past him, grabbing her simple, unbranded leather tote from the hall closet. "Elara, wait." She paused her hand on the door. "Tonight, the pre-gala reception at the Astor Linns. Don't be late. And for God's sake, wear the diamonds I bought you in Geneva. The yellow ones. I need to at least look like I have a wife who appreciates what she has." "I'll be there, Matteo," she said. Her hand, perfectly manicured, without his help, closed around the doorknob. "And Elara," he called out, already turning back to the window, his mind on his next call. "Yes. Try to look engaged. Try to look like you understand the world you live in. It reflects on me." The door closed with a soft, expensive click. Matteo Blackwood sighed, picked up his Macallan, and looked out over his city. He was the king, and she was just a pawn. He didn't even register the flash of icy-cold resolve in her eyes before she'd turned away. He didn't see it, because he had never, not once in their 5 years of marriage, truly looked at her. He saw a reflection. He saw a dependent. He saw, as he'd told his rival Marcus Thorne over golf, a beautiful, simple, well-bred girl from a good family that had lost its money. The perfect wife. No opinions, no ambition, just looks and breeding. He laughed at her. He laughed at her errands. He had no idea that Elara Blackwood had just walked out of her gilded cage and was now heading into her empire. Elara did not hail the doorman for the house Bentley. She walked 2 blocks east toward Lexington Avenue, melting into the mid-morning foot traffic of assistants grabbing coffee and tourists looking lost. She hailed a yellow cab, an anonymous, unremarkable act. "Where to?" Lady the driver asked, not even looking back. "Corner of Spring and Varick." "Soho," she replied. The penthouse on the Upper East Side was her prison. The city was her freedom. As the cab lurched into the flow of traffic, Elara's entire demeanor shifted. The soft, placid mask of Mrs. Blackwood dissolved. Her posture straightened. She pulled a slim, encrypted Stark Industries model smartphone from her tote, one Matteo had never seen, and began to type. Her fingers flew across the screen. "Julian. Traffic? ETA 10 minutes. Push the Tenhoto AM with the Tokyo Consortium to 10:15. I want the final Q3 reports on my desk before I walk in, and I want a triple shot cappuccino." Black. Waiting for you. Ms. Vance. The reply came instantly. 40 minutes later, the cab pulled up to an old 8-story brick building. It was classic Soho architecture, unassuming with a cast-iron facade painted a discreet charcoal grey. The ground floor was an obscure art gallery. There was no gleaming sign, no corporate logo. The only indication of its occupant was a small, sand-blasted brass plate next to a steel door, VA Holdings. Elara swiped a keycard. The steel door buzzed open, revealing not a lobby, but a high-speed private elevator. She stepped in, placed her thumb on a biometric scanner, and the elevator began its silent ascent. The doors opened onto a space that was the complete antithesis of her penthouse. It was a sprawling, open-plan office, buzzing with quiet, focused energy. Exposed brick, reclaimed timber beams, and cutting-edge technology coexisted. Dozens of analysts and developers sat at vast, curved monitors, their faces illuminated by streams of code and market data. This was the headquarters of Vance Ethel. Good morning, Miss Vance. Morning, Sarah. Morning, Ben. Not Miss Blackwood. Here she was, Miss Vance. A tall man in a sharp, dark blue suit, his hair a distinguished silver at the temples, met her at the elevator with a tablet and a steaming paper cup. This was Julian Hayes, her COO, her mentor, and the only person on Earth who knew her full story. Julian. Thank you, she said, taking the coffee. Report. Good, he said, falling into step as they walked toward her glass-walled office. The Tokyo deal is solid. They're just nervous about the regulatory hurdles in Germany. Your 10:15 call will smooth them over. The Q3s are on your desk. We beat projections by 9%. 9, I expected 12, she said, not unkindly. The TerraTech acquisition is slowing us down. It's a cash-heavy play. Which brings me to the next point, Matteo Blackwood. Elara stopped her hand on her office door. What about him? Blackwood Capital has been sniffing around TerraTech for the last 48 hours. Aggressively. They're trying to structure a leveraged buyout. TerraTech was a struggling but brilliant startup in Arizona that had just patented a revolutionary water purification system, one that could desalinate water with 90% less energy. It was a game changer. He's not buying TerraTech. Elara said, her voice flat. He's putting on the pressure. He sees it as a distressed asset, a quick flip. It's not a flip. It's the future, Elara said. She walked into her office and sat behind a massive desk of reclaimed oak. He thinks in quarters, Julian. We think in decades. Finalize our offer. 30% above his. All cash. Close it by end of day. I want the press release ready for tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, Elara, the Starlight Gala is tomorrow night. I know, she said, a small, cold smile touching her lips. And so is the big announcement. Julian paused, a rare look of concern on his face. He was in his late 50s, a former investment banker who had worked with Elara's father. Are you sure about this? The timing. The gala. You've kept Vance Ethel and Elara Blackwood separate for 5 years. Once this bell is rung, you can't unring it. He will know everything. Elara spun in her chair to look out the window. Her view wasn't of Central Park. It was of the rooftops of Soho, of industry of creation. He called me decorative Julian. He laughed at my errands. He thinks the woman he married is a simple-minded doll who exists to wear his diamonds and host his dinners. Her story was one of careful, deliberate construction. Her father, Dr. Aris Vance, was a brilliant, eccentric engineer. He'd invented the core algorithm for a new type of sustainable energy grid, but died penniless and in debt, his patents collecting dust. Elara, with her quiet brilliance in mathematics and finance, saw what her father's legacy was worth. When she met Matteo, he was the rising star of Blackwood Capital. He was charmed by her beauty and her good old money maiden name, not knowing the money was long gone. He saw her as a project, a beautiful painting to hang in his penthouse. When she'd once tried to show him her father's patents, he'd patted her on the head. "Leave the business to me, darling. It's too complicated for you." That was the day Vance Ethel was born. She'd used the last of her father's seed money, found private funding from investors in Zurich and Singapore, who didn't know Matteo Blackwood, and built her company in secret. Vance Ethel, Ethel meaning noble in Old English, a noble legacy. In 5 years, she had turned those patents into a green tech and sustainable investment fund worth billions. She was the anonymous benefactor, the silent partner, in dozens of tech unicorns. She operated through Julian, through shell corporations, and through a simple, unshakable secrecy. Her life with Matteo was a performance. Her work was her reality. "He needs to know," Elara said, turning back to Julian. "He needs to see." "And the gala?" Julian asked. "The sponsorship is confirmed. Anonymous benefactor, as requested. But they'll announce you before the main address." "I know. I've already sent my bio to Mrs. Astor Lynn's team. Under my name." "Your name?" Julian's eyebrows shot up. "Elara Vance." "Yes. He thinks Elara Vance died 5 years ago and became Mrs. Blackwood. He's about to find out Miss Vance has been very, very busy. This is more than business, Elara. This is a detonation." "It's a reckoning, Julian," she corrected him. He laughed at me. He told me I was nothing without his name. Tomorrow night, I'm giving him his name back. Matteo Blackwood was not having a good day. After his morning tirade, he'd gone to his office, a cavern of black marble and smoked glass in Midtown, only to find more problems. His bid for the Starlight Gala sponsorship hadn't just been outbid, it had been eclipsed. "They didn't just beat our offer, sir," his nervous VP of marketing said, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead. "Our offer was 20 million. The confirmed sponsorship is for 50 million. Matteo's blood ran cold. 50. In one check wired in full this morning, from a private holding company. Swiss. Untraceable for now. Mrs. Astor Lynn said she's never seen anything like it. They're naming the entire new STEM wing after, well, they don't know who yet. The benefactor is being revealed at the gala. 50 million. That wasn't just a donation. It was a statement. It was a power play that dwarfed his own. Blackwood Capital could have afforded it, but it would have been a strain. The company was over-leveraged. Matteo had made a series of aggressive, risky bets on commercial real estate, and the market was turning. He needed the positive puff from the gala to calm his investors. Now he wouldn't just be absent from the stage. He'd be the guy who got publicly humiliated. He spent the rest of the day in a controlled fury. He yelled at his traders. He demanded impossible deadlines. And he kept thinking about TerraTech. If he could just acquire that water purification patent, he could spin it off, create a green subsidiary, and change the narrative. "Get me Robert Hines at TerraTech," he barked at his assistant. A minute later, she buzzed back. "So Mr. Hines is unavailable. His assistant says they are in a priority meeting." "With who?" Matteo growled. She She wouldn't say, sir. Just that they were finalizing an acquisition and wouldn't be available for the rest of the week. Matteo slammed his fist on the desk. First the gala, now this. He felt a rare, unwelcome prickle of panic. It felt like sand slipping through his fingers. That evening, he arrived at the pre-gala reception at the Astor Lynn estate in a foul mood. Elara was already there as promised. She was standing by a towering floral arrangement, speaking quietly with Senator Albright. She was wearing the yellow diamonds. They were, he noted with detached approval, spectacular. She looked the part. "Elara," he said, striding up and placing a possessive hand on the small of her back. "Senator, good to see you." "Matteo," the senator smiled. "I was just congratulating your wife. Her passion for the Starlight Foundation's work is truly inspiring." Matteo laughed. "Oh, Elara. She loves her charities, keeps her busy." Elara's smile didn't waver, but her eyes when she met Matteo's were like chips of ice. "Matteo, you remember Mrs. Astor Lynn?" The older woman, the queen bee of New York philanthropy, drifted over. "Matteo, darling, we were so sorry to hear your bid didn't work out. But we're just thrilled with our new sponsor. Absolutely thrilled." "Yes, 50 million. Quite a statement," Matteo said, forcing a smile. "Any word on who it is? I'm dying to congratulate them." "Oh, it's a her," Mrs. Astor Lynn whispered, leaning in conspiratorially. "That's all I can tell you. A her. And she is, well, she's a force of nature. Utterly brilliant, and so private. This is her first major public appearance. We're seating you at her table tomorrow night, right next to her. You'll be the first to meet her." A her. Matteo's mind instantly cycled through the short list of female titans. Serafina Rodriguez of Apollo Global, Maria Smith of Smith Industries. He relaxed. This was good. He could network. He could turn this to his advantage. It was probably Serafina. He'd heard she was making a move into green tech. He glanced at Elara. She was listening politely, a picture of domestic grace. She hadn't bought a new face, but she'd clearly spent his allowance well. He felt a swell of pride, not in her, but in his ability to own her. He leaned down and whispered in her ear, "See, this is how it's done. Even when we lose, we get a seat at the head table. You just stand there, smile, and let me do the talking tomorrow night. Maybe I can spin this disaster into a partnership with this new mystery woman." Elara looked up at him. Her expression was placid, but there was a depth to her gaze he'd never seen before. "I'm sure you'll be fascinating, Matteo," she said. Later that night, back at the penthouse, the facade cracked. Matteo agitated by the gossip, and the pressure poured another Macallan. Elara was in the library reading. He hated when she read. It felt accusatory. "You were quiet tonight," he said, standing in the doorway. "I was listening," she replied, not looking up from her book. "Listening to what the senator—" "He was just being polite, Elara. He doesn't actually care about your opinion on whatever it is you talk about. Flowers, table settings." She carefully placed a bookmark and closed the book. The title on the spine read, "Principles of Advanced Water Desalination." He didn't notice. "You really don't see me at all, do you?" she asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple clinical observation. "I see a wife who has everything," he snapped. "A penthouse overlooking the park, a black card with no limit, a name that opens every door in this city, and I get nothing in return. Just a warm body in a pretty dress." "Nothing," she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "I run your household. I manage your social calendar. I host your investors. I sit through dinners with men whose hands linger too long on my back, all to help you close your deals. I have smiled until my face ached, and I have never, not once, embarrassed you. You don't call that something. I call that the job, he spat. The job you signed up for when you married me. You came from nothing, Elara. Your family name was Mud. Your father was a bankrupt dreamer who died with holes in his shoes. I gave you my name. I gave you this. He swept his arm around the opulent room. Elara stood up. She was trembling, but not with fear. It was a tightly coiled, white-hot rage that he mistook for weakness. "You're right, Matteo," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "You gave me this. You gave me this cage. You gave me this name." She walked past him. He grabbed her arm. "Where are you going? I'm not finished." She looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up to his face. Her expression was one he would later replay in his nightmares. It was pure, unadulterated pity. "Yes, you are, Matteo," she said, pulling her arm from his grasp. "You just don't know it yet. Remember you said that. Remember you said I was nothing but a name. Remember you said I came from nothing." She went into their bedroom and closed the door. He heard the lock click. He stood there baffled and furious. The arrogance of the woman. He'd have to remind her forcefully of her place, but first he had to prepare. He spent the rest of the night researching Serafina Rodriguez. He had to be ready to pitch a partnership. He had to salvage his company. He fell asleep in his study at 4:00 a.m., surrounded by financial reports, convinced he was preparing for the battle of his life. He was right. He was just preparing for the wrong opponent. The morning of the Starlight Gala dawned clear and cold. Matteo Blackwood woke in his study, a crick in his neck and a sour taste in his mouth. He'd dreamt of falling. He showered, dressed in his custom-made Brioni workout gear, and headed for his private gym, only to find Elara gone. A note was on the kitchen counter. Not a note, really. A post-it. "Have a fitting. We'll see you at the gala. E." "A fitting," he muttered, crumpling the note. "Of course." On the most important day of his quarter, she was off playing dress-up. He felt a flash of irritation at her coldness from the night before, but it was quickly subsumed by his own anxieties. Today was all about TerraTech. He arrived at his office by 7:00 a.m. "Get Hines at TerraTech on the phone. Now. I don't care if he's in a meeting. Tell his assistant I'm prepared to make an all-cash offer 20% over market value. Tell him Blackwood Capital is ready to move. Today." His assistant, pale and nervous, already had the information. "Sir, I'm afraid it's too late. It just hit the wires. TerraTech was acquired." Matteo froze. Acquired by who? Serafina. That rival firm in Chicago. "We don't know, sir. It was a private holding company, VA Holdings. The deal was finalized late last night. All cash, 35% over market value. They completely blindsided us, sir." VA Holdings. Matteo racked his brain. "I've never heard of them. Get me a full workup. Find out who they are. Who's on their board? Who's their CEO? I want a name, and I want it now." This was a catastrophe. TerraTech was his lifeline. It was his pivot. Without it, his portfolio looked dangerously unbalanced. His investors would be spooked. The panic he'd felt earlier returned this time as a cold dread. He was losing control. Across town, Elara Vance was not at a fitting. She was in the boardroom of Vance Ethel, signing the final document that concluded the $4.8 billion acquisition of Terra Tech. "It's done," Julian Hayes said, taking the pen from her. "Congratulations, Ms. Vance. You just cornered the market on sustainable water technology." Elara leaned back, allowing herself a small, satisfied smile. "My father's dream," she said quietly. "He always said you could save the world with clean water. Now we can." "The press release is queued," Julian said. "As requested, it will go live at 8:00 p.m. tonight, right as the speeches at the gala begin." "Good," Elara said. "I've also instructed Mrs. Astor Lynn's team. My speech will follow the announcement of the Terra Tech initiative." "You're announcing the acquisition at the gala?" Julian looked stunned. "That's aggressive. You're not just revealing yourself, you're throwing down a gauntlet." "Blackwood Capital isn't the only shark in the water, Julian. It's time the others learned my name." She stood and smoothed her blouse. "Now I actually do have a fitting." Her fitting was not at Bergdorf's. It was at a private, unmarked atelier in the West Village, run by a single reclusive designer known only as Madame Seraphine. Seraphine dressed royalty and billionaires who didn't want their names in vogue. Ms. Vance," the designer, an elegant woman in her 70s, said as Elara entered. "It is ready." Hanging in the center of the room was not a dress. It was a statement. It was not the pale, muted colors Matteo preferred. It was a deep, breathtaking sapphire blue, crafted from a heavy silk that seemed to drink the light. The cut was severe and elegant, a high, structured neckline, long sleeves, and a column skirt that pooled at the floor. It was the dress of a CEO, a monarch. It was a suit of armor. "It's perfect, Seraphine," Elara breathed. "You are not attending as a wife." Madame Seraphine observed, her eye sharp. "You are attending as a warrior." "Today they are one and the same," Elara replied. Matteo spent the day in a black fog. His research team had hit a brick wall. VA Holdings was a ghost. It was a labyrinth of international shells registered in Switzerland, managed out of Delaware with its primary funds in a Singapore trust. It was impenetrable. "There must be a name," he roared. "The only name we can find is the signatory on the SEC filings, sir. A man named Julian Hayes. He's a lawyer. Seems to be the COO. But the UBO, the ultimate beneficial owner, is sealed in a blind trust." Matteo was stumped. He was furious. He was, for the first time in his professional life, completely outmaneuvered. He went home at 6 to change. The penthouse was silent. Elara's dress bag was hanging on the closet door. It was from Chanel, or so he thought. Elara had been clever. She'd had her assistant pick up a decoy dress from Chanel, one she would wear to the gala, only to change at the last minute. The real dress from Madame Seraphine was already waiting for her in a private suite at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where the gala was being held. Matteo looked at the Chanel bag. "I hope you got something decent," he muttered to the empty room. "After last night, you owe me." He put on his bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo. He fastened his Patek Philippe watch. He looked in the mirror. He was Matteo Blackwood. He was a king. He'd been wrong-footed, yes, but tonight he would sit next to the new power player in New York, the mystery woman. He would charm her. He would find out what she wanted. He would forge an alliance. He could still turn this. He was so focused on the new unknown woman, he never once thought about the woman he already knew. Approx 1,300 words. The Temple of Dendur at the Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed. Bathed in ethereal blue and gold light, the ancient sandstone temple served as a backdrop for the most powerful people in the world. Waiters in white tuxedos moved silently with trays of vintage Dom Perignon. The quiet buzz of conversation was a symphony of mergers, politics, and art. The Blackwood's Rolls-Royce Phantom purred to a stop at the base of the museum's grand staircase. Paparazzi flashes erupted. "Matteo Blackwood! Mr. Blackwood!" Matteo stepped out, radiating confidence. He adjusted his bow tie and turned to help his wife. Elara emerged, and he gave her a quick, appraising glance. She was wearing the Chanel dress, a perfectly acceptable, elegant, but ultimately safe black sequined number. She looked beautiful and forgettable, his perfect accessory. "Good," he whispered, taking her arm. "You look fine." "Thank you, Matteo," she replied, her voice smooth. They ascended the steps, Matteo nodding to his peers, Elara smiling demurely. Inside the great hall, the air was warm and thick with the scent of lilies. Mrs. Astor Lynn, draped in emeralds, rushed toward them. "Matteo, Elara." "You're here, Mrs. Astor Lynn," Matteo said, kissing her cheek. "A stunning event, as always." "Just wait," she beamed. "Now, Elara, darling, I need to steal you for a moment. We have the private donors' reception in the Sackler wing. Mr. Blackwood," she said, turning to Matteo. "Your table is right at the front, table 1. You're right next to the podium. You'll have the best seat in the house." Matteo felt a thrill. "Excellent. And our sponsor. She'll be there." "Oh, yes," Mrs. Astor Lynn said, her eyes twinkling. "She's preparing. Now, Elara, come with me." Matteo watched Elara walk away, with the event host a pang of annoyance hitting him. "Probably to review the silent auction items," he muttered. He smoothed his tuxedo and made his way into the Temple of Dendur. His table was as promised, front and center. He saw the place cards: Mayor Johnson, Senator Albright, Serafina Rodriguez, and right next to his own, a blank card that simply read, "Our honored guest." "Matteo!" a voice boomed. Matteo turned to see his rival Marcus Thorne, a broad, boisterous man who ran a rival equity firm. "Marcus, good to see you," Matteo said, forcing a smile. "Is it—" Marcus laughed, clapping Matteo on the shoulder. "Heard you got kicked to the curb on the sponsorship and on Terra Tech, both in 24 hours. That's got a sting, Blackwood." "I pivot, Marcus. You know that. I'm already in talks with the new sponsor. We're at the same table." Matteo lied smoothly. "Oh, are you? Well, I'm eager to see who this mystery woman is. She's got this whole city in a spin." Marcus moved on, and Matteo sat his jaw tight. Meanwhile, Elara was not at a donor's reception. Mrs. Astor Lynn had personally escorted her to a private museum office that had been converted into a dressing room. Her team was there: Julian Hayes, a publicist, and her personal assistant. Hanging on the door was the sapphire blue dress from Madame Seraphine. "Are you ready, Miss Vance?" Julian asked, handing her a folder. Elara slipped out of the decoy Chanel dress. "The speech," she said, taking the folder. "It's just the bullet points you requested, and the final press release. It's scheduled to go live in 10 minutes. Elara nodded, slipping into the heavy silk. It felt cool against her skin. Her assistant helped with the zipper, and as it rose, Elara felt her transformation complete. She was no longer Mrs. Blackwood. She stood in front of the mirror. The dress was magnificent. It was the color of a deep ocean, the color of power. Her assistant undid her simple chignon, and her blonde hair fell to her shoulders. It was brushed back, sleek and severe. She put on her real jewelry. Not Matteo's yellow diamonds. It was a modern architectural necklace of white gold and raw-cut diamonds, a piece she had commissioned herself from a designer in Antwerp. She looked formidable. "Good," she said, her voice a low, steady hum. "It's time." Back in the gala, the lights began to dim. The chatter subsided. Matteo sat straighter, checking his Patek Philippe. 7:59 p.m. At that exact moment, in every newsroom and trading floor in the world, an alert pinged. Business's wire. VA Holdings. A private green tech fund acquires TerraTech in 4.8B. All cash deal. Initiative to be announced at Starlight Gala. Matteo's phone vibrated on the table. So did Serafina Rodriguez's. So did Marcus Thorne's. A collective murmur went through the room as dozens of high-profile guests read the alert. Matteo's eyes widened in horror. VA Holdings, the ghost, they were here. This was the sponsor. His head whipped around, scanning the room. Who was it? Who was VA Holdings? On stage, Mrs. Astor Lynn tapped the microphone. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Tonight we have shattered every record in the history of the Starlight Foundation. We have done so thanks to the vision and unparalleled generosity of one person." Matteo was sweating. His heart was hammering. This was it. This person is to me the very definition of a modern visionary. Someone who built an empire not for fame, but for the future. You all just received the business alert. You know what she did. Now you get to see who she is. Matteo leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the stage. She is the founder and CEO of Vance Ethel, the parent company of VA Holdings. She is the mind that just secured the future of clean water. It is my profound personal honor to introduce our main sponsor, our benefactor, and my dear friend, Ms. Elara Vance. The name hung in the air, suspended in the stunned, cavernous silence of the Temple of Denda. Elara. Vance. Matteo Blackwood's brain refused to process the syllables. It was a glitch, a misprint, a terrible echoing mistake. Vance. That was her maiden name. A name that meant nothing. A name synonymous with dusty libraries and forgotten patents. He turned to his left, where the honored guest chair sat empty. He turned to his right, to Serafina Rodriguez, who was staring at him with a look of utter electrifying confusion. What did she say? Matteo whispered, his mouth dry. She said Elara Vance. Serafina whispered back, her eyes darting to the stage. A single brilliant white spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the stage-left entrance. And there she was. It was not the woman who had left his penthouse that morning. It was not the demure wife in the safe Chanel dress. This was a different being inwardly. The woman who walked onto the stage was a queen. The sapphire dress seemed to have been spun from the night sky itself, clinging to her form, with an authority that stunned the room. The raw diamond necklace at her throat caught the light and shattered it into 1,000 tiny daggers. Her hair was pulled back, emphasizing the severe, intelligent beauty of her face. Her walk was not a drift, it was a stride. Confident, measured, and utterly terrifying. She was Elara. But she was not his Elara. A disbelieving murmur rippled through the crowd. That's Elara Blackwood. Vance Ethel. I've heard of them. They're monsters in the green tech space. They're bigger than... That's his wife. Matteo felt the blood drain from his face. The room tilted. Every eye in that 200-person hall, the senators, the mayors, the billionaires, His rival's was on him. He could feel their gazes like physical blows. He was the center of attention, but as the object of a joke he had never been told. Marcus Thorne, 2 tables over, was staring, his jaw literally open, a piece of bread halfway to his mouth. On stage, Elara reached the podium. She adjusted the microphone, the sound echoing in the silence. She looked out at the crowd, her gaze sweeping over them, calm and commanding. Then her eyes found Matteo's. She looked right at him. Table 1. The best seat in the house. There was no malice in her gaze, no anger, no triumph. There was something far, far worse: indifference. It was the look a geologist might give a common rock before stepping over it. In that single 3-second stare, Matteo Blackwood ceased to exist for her. "Thank you, Mrs. Astor Lynn," Elara's voice rang out. It wasn't the soft, agreeable murmur he was used to. It was a clear, crisp, confident alto. A CEO's voice. A voice that closed billion-dollar deals. "My father, Dr. Aris Vance, was a brilliant man," she began. "He believed that true innovation wasn't about profit, it was about legacy. He dreamed of a world where technology served humanity, not the other way around. But he was a dreamer, not a businessman. He died with pennies in his pocket, and a mind full of dreams that the world told him were worthless." Matteo remembered his own words, sneered in the library. "Your father was a bankrupt dreamer who died with holes in his shoes." He felt a cold spike of nausea. "For the past 5 years," Elara continued, "I have worked to make those dreams a reality. I founded Vance Ethel with a simple mission to fund the future, to find the brilliant minds the world has overlooked and give them the resources to change the world." She was Vance Ethel, VA Holdings, V.A. Elara Vance. It was so simple. It was so obvious. It had been right in front of him, sleeping in his bed for 5 years, and he had been laughing at her. "My father's greatest unfinished work," she went on, "was in water purification. He believed that access to clean water was not a privilege, but a fundamental human right." Matteo stopped breathing. "No. That is why I am so thrilled to announce tonight that my company Vance Ethel has completed its acquisition of TerraTech." The room gasped. This wasn't just a donation speech. It was a market-moving announcement. Serafina Rodriguez shot Matteo a look that was half pity, half unholy respect for his wife. She bought it," Matteo choked out. The company he was hunting, the company that was his lifeline. His quiet, simple wife had bought it out from under him while she was supposedly at a fitting. "Effective immediately," Elara announced. "Vance Ethel is open-sourcing the core TerraTech patent. It will be made available, free of charge, to the Starlight Foundation and any non-profit organization working to bring clean water to developing nations. That is my father's legacy. That is the future we are funding." She didn't need the profit from the patent. She was giving it away. She wasn't just richer than him. She was in a different league. He played for profit. She played for power. A standing ovation began a rolling wave of thunder that shook the ancient temple. Senator Albright was on his feet. The mayor was on his feet. Serafina Rodriguez was on her feet, clapping with genuine admiration. Matteo remained seated frozen. He was a statue in a Tom Ford suit. He was paralyzed by the sheer scale of his own stupidity, his allowance, her errands, his condescension, his laughter. "Try not to break a nail. You are nothing without my name." A beautiful, simple, well-bred girl. His entire life was a lie. He wasn't the king. He was the court jester in his own home, and the entire world had just found out. Elara raised her hand, and the applause slowly died down. "Thank you," she said. She smiled a real radiant smile that Matteo had never seen. It was not meant for him. It was meant for her audience, her peers. She concluded her speech, gathered her notes, and walked off the stage. She didn't look at him again. The lights came up. The buzz in the room was electric. But no one was talking about the foundation. They were all talking about Elara Vance, and they were all looking at Matteo Blackwood. He sat there, the spotlight gone, as the first person finally approached his table. It was Marcus Thorne. He walked over slowly, picked up Matteo's untouched glass of Dom Perignon, and raised it in a toast. "Well, Blackwood," Marcus said, his voice laced with a brutal, mocking pity, "you finally did it. You're married to the most powerful person in the room." He took a sip. "Amazing. All this time we thought you were the shark." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Turns out you were just the bait." The rest of the gala was a blur of humiliation for Matteo. He was a ghost at his own funeral. The seat next to him, the honored guest seat, his wife's seat, remained empty. Elara, as Miss Vance, was not sitting down. She was holding court. Matteo watched as if from a great distance, as a gravitational pull formed around her. The mayor was laughing at something she said. Senator Albright had a hand on her arm, speaking with earnest intensity. Serafina Rodriguez, the woman he had planned to pitch, was waiting in line to speak to her, looking impressed. No one spoke to Matteo. No one even made eye contact. He was irrelevant. The name Blackwood, which he had thrown in Elara's face as her single greatest asset, was now a footnote to Vance. He wanted to flee. He wanted to scream. But he was trapped, pinned to his chair by the weight of 1,000 judgments. He stayed until the bitter end, drinking glass after glass of champagne, the bubbles tasting like ash. The ride home was in the Rolls-Royce Phantom. The silence in the car was louder than any argument they had ever had. Elara Ms. Vance sat across from him. She wasn't looking out the window. She was on her encrypted Stark phone, her thumb scrolling through what he now knew were not social media feeds, but market reports. "Congratulations," he finally said. The word came out like broken glass. She didn't look up. For what? The performance, the speech, Vance Ethel. It was quite a show. She finally locked her phone and placed it in her bag. She looked at him, and her eyes were empty. "It wasn't a show, Matteo. It was my work. 5 years, Elara. 5 years of this lying to my face every single day. I never lied to you," she said, her voice perfectly level. "You simply never asked. You told me who I was. You told me I was simple. You told me I was decorative. You told me my errands were buying shoes. You saw what you wanted to see, a mirror for your own ego. My money. You used my money to build this," he accused, his voice rising in desperation. Elara actually laughed. It was not her soft, polite titter. It was a sharp, cold, genuine sound of amusement. It was the laugh of a predator. "Your money," she said. "Matteo, I haven't touched your bank account or that ridiculous allowance since our first anniversary. I've been paying my own share of this penthouse, this car, these trips for 4 years. By routing the funds through a shell company that you thought was a tax write-off. Your accountants never even noticed." She leaned forward. "My errands were board meetings in Zurich. My charity luncheons were final negotiations with my investors in Singapore. My fitting today. It was signing the final acquisition papers for TerraTech, the company you were trying to buy. The elevator to the penthouse chimed. The doors opened. He was home, but it was no longer his. He stalked into the living room, grabbing the decanter of Macallan. He needed a drink. He needed to think. "So what now?" he demanded, pouring a glass. "You move your office. In here, you expect me to just, what, be Mr. Vance?" "No," she said. She wasn't following him. She had stopped by the hall closet. She pulled out a sleek, dark suitcase. It was already packed. Matteo froze. "What is that?" "Where are you going?" "I'm not going anywhere," Elara said, setting the suitcase by the door. "I'm staying in my apartment, the one I own in Soho near my actual office. You are the one with a problem." "A problem You told me I was nothing without your name," she said, walking toward him, her voice a clinical, precise blade. "You told me I came from nothing. You laughed at my father's legacy. You stood in this very room and called me a vacuous wife." "Elara, I was stressed. The market. I didn't mean—" "You did," she said, stopping just feet from him. "You meant every word. The only reason you're backtracking now is because you've seen my bank balance. You don't respect me, Matteo. You respect money. And you just realized I have more of it than you ever will." He saw his mistake. His company was leveraged. She was liquid. He needed her. He shifted tactics. "Elara, darling, be reasonable," he said, trying for a conciliatory tone. "Think of what we could do together. Blackwood and Vance. We could be unstoppable. We could merge. We love each other." She looked at him. The pity was back, sharp and devastating. "Love you don't love me. You loved the idea of me. You loved owning me. But the most valuable thing you owned just walked out of its cage." She walked to the door. "And as for merging," she paused, her hand on the handle, "you should probably call your CFO." A cold dread, deeper than anything he'd felt at the gala, seized him. "Why?" "Blackwood Capital is over-leveraged, Matteo. You made bad bets on commercial real estate. Your investors are nervous. You needed the TerraTech deal to calm them. You needed the gala to look strong. You have neither." How do you know that?" he whispered. "Because while you were busy researching Serafina Rodriguez, I was busy becoming your primary creditor." He dropped his glass. The Macallan, 25. His symbol of power shattered on the marble floor. "What, Vance Ethel, through a subsidiary in the Cayman Islands, bought your debt last week. All of it. The $800 million you owe to Deutsche Bank and the Hong Kong consortium. I own it." She opened the door. Her COO, Julian Hayes, was standing outside next to a private security guard. "Matteo Blackwood." Julian said, his voice polite but firm. "You'll be receiving a call from our legal team at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. We'll be discussing the new terms of your loans. I'd advise you to be cooperative." Matteo was speechless. He was ruined. He wasn't just married to a powerful woman. He wasn't just out-negotiated by her. He worked for her. Elara looked back at him, a final appraising glance at the man who had laughed at her. He was small, pathetic, drowning in a penthouse he could no longer afford. "The problem, Matteo," she said, her voice soft, "is that you always assumed you were the most important person in the room. You never stopped to wonder if you were." She turned and walked out. The door clicked shut, the sound of a vault sealing. Matteo Blackwood was left alone in the silent penthouse, his empire in ashes destroyed by the one person he never even saw. And just like that, the gilded sassoon was empty and the king was left with nothing but his own echo. Elara Vance didn't just build her own table. She bought the entire building. This story is a powerful reminder that you should never, ever underestimate the person sitting quietly next to you. The ones who move in silence are often the ones making the most powerful moves. What did you think of Matteo's reaction? Was Elara's revenge too harsh, or was it perfectly served? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you loved this story and want more tales of dramatic twists and just desserts, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.